Welcome, everyone, to The Greater Good. I'm really excited to have Alicia Brav with me today with BRAV Consultations. Hi, Alicia.
Hi, how are you today?
It's so nice to see you.
Thank you.
Last time I saw Alicia, she was getting an award by the Seroptimus Club up in Poway. You want to tell us a little about that exciting event?
Oh, it was wonderful just to be able to be in a room with so many like-minded individuals dedicated to addressing human trafficking in all its forms. So Stat Seroptimus was very gracious in recognizing my contributions for promoting awareness on human trafficking in San Diego County, both in terms of sex and labor exploitation and trafficking.
Yeah, it's a challenging area for sure. Yes. As you know, our foundation has one of our prime focuses is also on creating awareness about human trafficking and labor trafficking throughout our jurisdiction. So tell me a little bit about BRAV Consultations. What is it that you do there?
So I founded the business in 2017, and our dedication is specifically to addressing human rights from bridging the gaps in research, practice, and evaluation.
So when you say research practices, what does that mean?
So essentially bridging, and sorry, I'm going to have to correct myself. So bridging the gaps in research, policy, and practice from a human rights framework is my catchphrase, but essentially bringing that down into best practices, thinking about, yes, what do the individuals who are in the work day in, day out, as well as what the research shows us in terms of trends and analyses of human trafficking, and then thinking of it from a policy perspective, where can we strengthen our best practices?
So do you work primarily then between governmental agencies and NGOs or non-governmental agencies? Is that really where your business focus is?
At this point, most of my work is primarily with nonprofits, addressing both prevention and intervention, as well as direct services for survivors of trauma. But eventually, yes, I would love to work with government sectors. I'm also on a few advisory bodies.
So what advisory bodies are you on?
The primary one that I am currently on until, well, I shouldn't say until, we have elections actually coming up, so I always have to put that little catch. But essentially, yes, I'm on the San Diego Regional Advisory Council on Human Trafficking and CSEC. CSEC is Commercial Sexual Exploitation of Children.
Yeah, children. That's the really harsh, painful portion of what it is that you and I do in this world of human trafficking. Statistically, I'm sure you're aware that the trafficked age used to be around 16 years old was the average age for women mostly who were trafficked in San Diego County, and now it's down to 12, 13, 14 years old. Do you have a position on that? How do you think that why are those numbers dropping?
I think that there's a couple pieces that specifically that one research that I think we cite so well in San Diego is specifically, if I remember correctly, affiliated with gang-affiliated sex trafficking. So that involves a few other variables when we're thinking about coercion and recruitment. When I'm thinking about the ages of 12, I also have to say thank you to the pandemic, because we're starting to see just how much technology is a part of human trafficking, and that recruitment is also happening online. So I think our numbers are just starting to catch up to what's already occurring. Mm-hmm. And also I have to say, I think that we still are not fully cognizant of the impact of interfamilial trafficking and recruitment that occurs within the broader context of interpersonal relationships.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So when you say interfamilial, you're talking about direct or indirect family members that are then promoting their niece or their daughter or goddaughter, something along those lines. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
How do people sleep with that? That's just abhorrent in terms of what that does to the family dynamic and what it does to that young girl for the rest of her life.
Absolutely. And our young boys. We see consistently that if you're looking at from a trauma across the lifespan, if an individual does not get early access to intervention, the potential for re-victimization across the lifespan is enhanced, or heightened, I should say. And so thinking about it from a trauma-informed framework, making sure that, yes, we improve identification and prosecution under the 4Ps framework that we have in San Diego, but also bridging partnerships. So making sure that that individual is supported across their lifespan from the time that they are, for example, maybe under the age of 8, 12, 16 into their young adulthood and transitioning into new stages of their lives and making sure that support is in place.
What's the 4Ps framework?
The 4Ps is prevention. I am so used to saying these acronyms, sorry. So the 4Ps are prevention, prosecution, partnerships, and of course, protection. Sorry, so it's starting over. So prevention, protection, prosecution, and partnerships. And under the San Diego Regional Advisory Council Community Subcommittee, where we focus on prevention, I also have included the 4 Cs. So we talk about it from a point of communication, connection, collaboration, and change. Mm-hmm. So hopefully from a societal perspective, while bringing everyone into the space together, we'll be able to create more comprehensive solutions and ultimately ending human trafficking in San Diego County.
Well, that's a lofty goal for sure, yes, but one that I certainly support. So where is it, do you think the actual change is going to occur? Do you think it's going to be governmental intervention or it's going to come from private sector?
I think both. I think that there's a lot of opportunity both when we think about government, yes, legislation, enhancing funding for able stakeholders to help with, once again, prevention, protection, and prosecution, but also thinking in terms of partnerships, bringing in private sectors and being able to really think innovatively about how are we identifying human trafficking in the first place, identifying the money transfers from banking, safe banking for survivors, bringing in opportunities when we're thinking about workforce development and how do we bridge being a place of feeling coerced and dependent and being isolated to a place of self-efficacy and autonomy and being able to thrive in your own right.
So how does that philosophy connect with, say, Senate Bill 357, which is counter to what most people would consider to be logic as to how to address this issue of women on the street,
yes,
selling their bodies, being raped 10, 15, 20 times a day, yes, for no money? How does that connect with policy when the legislators are enacting these kinds of processes that go against common sense?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, you highlighted it perfectly. I think that we're seeing the unintended consequences when you see policy being developed without being fully informed by best practices and research and evaluation of these systems, and being able to say quantitatively, is this the best intervention before we actually implement it? And so when we're looking at this, we're seeing the unintended consequences where on paper it looked like a good idea, but in practice, we're seeing that people are being continually raped and exploited on a day in, day out basis. And if anything, it's exacerbated into broad daylight because there is no quote unquote complication or consequence for being blatantly in your face about prostitution.
Well, Senator Wiener, great name, needs to kind of realign his thinking. And do you know anything happening as it, to maybe recall that legislation?
I know that there's a couple initiatives in place, and I know that there are some amazing survivor advocates and nonprofits here in San Diego and abroad throughout California that are sincerely trying to, I don't know if repeal is the best term, but try to modify the bill as it stands, and also make a point of identifying opportunities for strengthening both identification but also resources for individuals who do need to get out of the life or want to get out of the life. One of the things that as well as I do, Bilateral Safety Corridor Coalition is an amazing agency locally that has a national voice. And so they have been able to really lead the change about SB 357, bringing coalitions together and really starting from the ground up, talking about how can we work collectively to try to address SB 357.
Yeah. Marissa Ugarte has a very strong voice for sure. That's all interesting, but it kind of brings me back to my concern that most change occurs when you have a united concepts and ideas coming from the public as opposed to the other way around, where the government tells us what they think is right for us.
Yes. Well, I would also say, from a prevention standpoint, we've developed campaigns over the last 20 years talking about human trafficking, and I think that we are finding that sometimes we are in our own worlds and we speak to each other, and it creates this echo chamber. And so we assume that everyone is sharing the same information. And then you can go into a whole other space and you realize very quickly, no, they still assume that this is a choice, or they still presume that there is, once said intervention is in place, well, that's just it. Human trafficking doesn't exist anymore. The person isn't vulnerable to being re-victimized again in some capacity, that individual may not ever need to have additional services again. And that's just not based in fact.
No. That's where our job comes in, isn't it? Create awareness. It's surprising to me, in the 8,000 to 9,000 people that we have trained in the last year, just with our program alone, supermajority of those people are law enforcement. And you would think that they would have a better idea about the reality on the ground, but in fact, they're living in the past. Most of them, still viewing these victims as criminals. And so, throughout San Diego County, that's not the case, thanks to the strong will of Summer Steffen and other leaders in our communities that have adopted a very progressive, informed concept of what human trafficking is about. But we have been contacted by other counties, other states for our training, and when we meet with these people, they are ignorant. Completely ignorant about what human trafficking is all about. So, we have a really big job ahead of us.
Absolutely. And I was just going to ask, do you find that people are getting more stuck on what is coercion and what does it look like pragmatically with our survivors, or do you think it's more the force and fraud that people are kind of getting stuck on?
I think it's a triangle. I think it's a combination of all three of those forces, and it's really very mercurial. It depends on what the trafficker needs to use at that moment to get what he wants from that victim. So it might just start out with simple coercion, and then depending on the victim's response, it then goes to physical, enforcement of the rules that person's putting down for that woman, so that she can go out and earn money for him and be raped, 15 times a day.
Absolutely. And also, to your point, I think it's also much more difficult to sometimes distinguish within law enforcement. Is it a domestic violence incident versus a human trafficking? Because unfortunately, some of our survivors, their trafficker is also a significant other. And so being able to identify what is domestic violence under the codes versus human trafficking. Do you find that there's also been some pushback about how to identify it, in the sense that is it safer, for lack of a better term, to say let's classify it as domestic violence versus human trafficking based on the evidence that's available at the time?
That's an excellent question. And I'm not really sure what the answer to that is. I know in speaking with our officers and our human trafficking liaison team that we developed in the Harbor Police Department, I find that most of those officers, they just look for whatever's going to get that woman in the safest place the soonest. And in terms of prosecution, for domestic violence or human trafficking, clearly domestic violence is easier to prosecute than human trafficking. I think, we have to understand the reality of that. So really, I think the primary function of law enforcement as it relates to human trafficking, first and foremost, is to get that woman or young man out of that situation, out of the life as quickly as possible. The prosecution, that's a whole other topic.
Yes. And I was going to say also a whole other court.
It's very different. Yeah, very different. And, with domestic violence, that's, life-altering, scars those people, forever, has, clear consequences that go well beyond the physical act of being beaten or kicked or yelled at or whatever. Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about some of your great clients that you've had that you've really enjoyed working with.
Well, I can't disclose everyone that I've worked with, but I can share that, I've been blessed to be able to work with agencies that are addressing an array of services that all, at the end of the day, are interconnected with human trafficking. So when we think about human trafficking provider agencies all the way to individual agencies that are dealing with reentry services and thinking about bridging the gaps, because we recognize that our survivors, to your point, are often criminalized. And so being able to identify them at different stages in different systems to be able to connect them with resources. It's been truly an amazing opportunity. I can't believe the work I've done since 2017 to present, and I find that my career continues to evolve over time. Mm-hmm. And so I just look forward to what lies in the future before me.
Yeah, well, you have a voice. You're being noticed very clearly. For the work that you do, certainly on the regional committee. You've got a great lineup of people on there, not the least of which, Marion Barrett, with supervised or oversight by Summer Steffen, who just in just her alone, she's a force to be reckoned with. Amazing woman. So you have your consulting firm started 2017. Mm-hmm. What did you do before that?
I was working in different nonprofits, primarily working as a forensic research assistant, trying to develop, I shouldn't say develop, supporting a subject expert witness testimony. And so in those spaces, it was a wide range of civil and criminal court cases that I was able to work on. That really allowed me to also build my skill set and be able to work collaboratively on a team and explore really what are the implications of trauma across the lifespan. So
you were assisting potential criminal defense or criminal prosecution lawyers in prep for these trials. Is that what you're doing?
Yes.
Yeah. So that can be really profitable work. If you're dealing in the private sector, not so much in the public sector. Mm-hmm. So how do you have a preference on where you'd like to work there?
I'm really flexible in terms of, I think that the first and foremost, am I passionate about the subject matter? I think also really helps deciding what projects I'll take on. Being able to address trauma first and foremost and figuring out what is my niche within that project is also helpful for me to determine whether or not it's a good fit. Other services that I don't often promote, but I do, is grant writing and helping with prevention. For example, I have an amazing nonprofit that I work with that's dedicated to addressing child abuse prevention. And they are the only agency within North County that actually works with communities of color, specifically the Hispanic community and undocumented families. And so they are able to work in their native tongue and being able to work and provide resources. Yeah.
Grant writers, few and far between, especially the good ones. Yeah, I'll be calling you.
Deal.
Yeah, everyone's looking for a grant writer these days.
Well, and valid, because I think we're all seeing the costs and the economic turns that we're all trying to navigate and thinking in terms of the market moving forward, even 2-3 years from now, what's that going to look like in terms of helping be sustainable? Right.
Yeah, I think there are a number of agencies that just haven't been able to sustain themselves, and they're no longer out doing the good work, as it were. So are you familiar with the Conrad Previs Foundation?
Very briefly. I'm not very familiar with them.
So Conrad Previs was a billionaire developer who left his legacy and created this foundation where he basically inured all of his wealth into that foundation. And they recently hired this amazing gentleman from back east to come in and kind of revamp them. And their primary focus in the past had been medical, or I'm sure if you're driving down Highway 5 at UCSD, you'll see the Conrad Previs buildings, and it's a very, very generous foundation. But they recently are realigning themselves, and their primary focus still is medicine and education. But with this new leadership, they are starting to look at addressing human trafficking, labor trafficking here in San Diego County.
Interesting.
The real benefit is that they are very local in who they give grants to. They like to give their grants specifically to people, organizations in San Diego County. But you should be looking to them because they're a real force.
Oh, excellent. Do you mind if I ask, do you know if they're specifically looking at the medical components of identifying sex and labor trafficking?
I don't know that. They haven't really opened back up for business to offer up grants, but they're out. They've got a dog and pony show going up and down the county to just talk more and more about, what are the real needs, and collaboration is, of course, critical to all of that. So
excellent.
Yeah, I'm hoping to get them more and more involved in what it is that you and I do, because it's a big issue.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I love the idea of there being additional resources. I think that there's never such thing as having too many people at the table when it comes to this issue.
No, especially people that are willing to not only source or their talent, but we need treasure just as much as we need talent. Yeah. And I think that's one of the most interesting things about the Previs Foundation is that they want to recognize the talent. So when you put a grant out and it has 15% in there for administrative costs, a lot of grantors are really not interested in funding that. They just want all their money to go into the program, which of course is nonsense, because the program can't exist without people, and the people, they have to eat, they have to be paid.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So look for more on Previs. So you have this. What was it that brought you into this world?
Long story. So I was probably like most college students trying to find myself and figure out what I wanted to do. Changed my major well over 2-3 times, trying to figure out what would be my best niche. And then I realized that I really was concentrated around human rights, forensics, law, and research. And I was trying to find what best fit. And I realized, of course, that I was also very most of my work was dedicated to gender-based violence and looking at it from a holistic perspective within the United States. And what does that look like? But also from a policy perspective, where have we been to where are we now? And I was originally at Arizona State University planning on getting my bachelor's in science at justice studies, concentrations in psychology and women's studies, fully intending to work in domestic violence and specifically with deaf women who were experiencing domestic violence. And during that time, while I was at ASU, I just was fully embraced, and I had wonderful mentors, and I realized very quickly that I was really interested in a much larger and under-addressed subject, which was human trafficking. And then that led to going to UCI and amazing internships at the Institute of Violence, Abuse, and Trauma, and really being allowed to fully explore my areas of interest, but also looking at it from a human rights framework and thinking about, in the United States, where can we do better?
Right, yeah. So from my personal experience, this work can be really depressing.
It can be.
So it can be, for me anyway. Yeah. It has been. I'm able to work around that when you look at the impact that we make. So you don't have that issue ever coming up with you?
I have moments. I would say that I think that true to, most of the research we talk about when it comes to, either vicarious trauma or burnout is that we often become depressed, anxious, cynical. We think, but we also, to prevent burnout, there's opportunities to have day-to-day protections. We often call it self-care, but just being able to have that time in my day for self-reflection and introspection and planning, what do I foresee and what do I want to do, and realizing that sometimes the best form of self-care is accepting that there are going to be hurdles that we must embrace every day, but that we can also be determined in our goals and flexible in our methods and how we get there. So it's with addressing human trafficking, it's a marathon. It's not going to be a sprint. And also, like I said, fortunately, because of what I decided to do was, instead of getting potentially burned out because of investing in one particular case, I opted for a business model where I'm working at system level. And so I was able to look both at the dualistic relationships of how does the system impact the individual, but how does the individual impact the system? And so I find my hope and my inspiration in getting to work with these agencies and being able to strengthen their abilities and how they are able to work with this population for an extended period of time. Because unfortunately, in most nonprofits in San Diego County addressing human trafficking, but I also think at the larger level, I don't think it's abnormal to see nonprofits where there's an average of 1 to 2 year retention. So being able to maintain your capacity is the best strategy for addressing both prevention of burnout, but also intervention of burnout and looking at your workplace culture.
How do they? It's pretty clear most nonprofits struggle to, be sustainable. How is it that what you do, which is really dramatic, almost bird's eye approach, or like you're talking systems approach, how do they afford the services of your firm?
Well, this is probably what I shouldn't tell people. I make a point of being accessible, and so I do not. I don't have grandiose prices. I still charge by the hour because I want to make sure people feel that I am accessible, and I still keep my prices pretty reasonable. And one of the things that I often toy with is, do I want to go project-based versus hourly salary? And I know you and I have had those conversations about what are the strengths and limitations. And at this point, I've still chose to be hourly just because I don't want to by any way make a startup, for example, feel like they can't reach out to me because they may not necessarily have the capital. And so I try to create revenue in multiple ways.
Right.
And so I always, just like I tell my clients, have a diversified portfolio. I would say that to any consultant, is just planning in advance about what you want to consult on, what you want to train on, what do you want to do in terms of additional services to buffer. And so that you can also make sure that you have access to multiple forms of revenue, but also multiple opportunities to expand your own skill base.
Right. Yeah, well, that's very generous of you. And unfortunately, that's kind of where we are right now in terms of, what nonprofits can afford. So, yeah, thank you for that. That's great. Certainly your reputation precedes you there. I mean, that's why we're sitting here today, is because you're making a difference. And being on the regional committee, does that have any enforcement impact, or is it just advisory? What happens with your recommendations?
So we're an advisory body under the Board of Supervisors, and so we have the ability to provide recommendations and consult on specific policy as needed, best practices. We provide opportunities to share updates among the 10 subcommittees that are part of our advisory body, and we all have unique initiatives, and so we've been able to provide different spaces for different initiatives and opportunities to expand. And of course, anyone and everyone is welcome to join my community subcommittee, where we focus on prevention and education and being able to create those general understanding of human trafficking. What is it? How to identify it? What are the signs of it? And then, of course, if you would like to explore other opportunities, feel free to, of course, reach out to me or to Jeff, and we'll be glad to connect you and be able to find best practices that would fit your areas of need.
So the County Board of Supervisors is now pretty diverse in terms of its left and right leanings, and that's a good thing. Do you find that the current lineup of supervisors is really listening to the real needs in terms of human trafficking? Oh,
absolutely. I think that we see within the last few months, we've seen quite a few statements about human trafficking and trying to bring awareness to the issues. And I think that's, once again, that's bringing government and nonprofits together as well as private sector and talking about how do we, within the county, want to address human trafficking.
Well, certainly One Safe Place and A Safe Place are great examples of community outreach in terms, for any number of issues, including domestic violence and homelessness and human trafficking. So have you been to the North County Safe Place?
Oh, it's amazing, isn't it?
It's, I don't know how Summer and her team pulled that off, but it's probably some of the most interesting tenant improvements that I've ever seen from a government agency.
Oh, absolutely. And just to sing both Your Safe Place and One Safe Place's praises, both of them have opportunities where they're bridging the partnerships so that they are able to have nonprofits in those spaces to provide one hub for resources. And it's truly an innovative model that I hope that the rest of the state, if not nationally, adopts.
Yeah, I think we need more even in San Diego County. We have recently brought human traffic victim from North Carolina with her 9-year-old daughter, and she was pregnant from any number of people that raped her, uncertain about that. And in fact, she's due to have her baby any minute. I'm waiting for the phone call. Oh. We've adopted this woman. And the services that she was presented really were woefully inadequate. Not through anyone's, ill intent, but just, we really need to up our game. When throughout the county, maybe we have a total of 40 beds total for women. And certainly for minors, it's even more despicable in terms of, I wouldn't want to send anybody to the Polanski Center, let alone a minor who's been the victim of human trafficking. But, where else do they go?
Oh, absolutely. There are a few initiatives that are available, like not One Safe Place, sorry, I got that stuck in my head. The Safe Shelter Collaborative. And so that is a resource for nonprofits that are providing residential. If for whatever reason they don't have the space capacity, they can share on that app, and then they can also find a hotel. Now, that's not ideal for a minor, I would say, just because of the safety concerns that we would have. But no, I agree with you. I think that there's always room for improvement, and I think that's the difference between being able to continue to strive to meet our goals versus feeling stagnant and cynical about whether or not we should stay in this place because, well, that's just what's going to be working for now, and versus saying, okay, we know where this is. We know that this doesn't work. Who isn't at the table yet so that we can bring that change? Because as you were sharing, I'm both thinking about, yes, pregnancy, sexual trauma. I'm also thinking about, based on the individual's age, is she a high-risk pregnancy? Yeah. And so whether or not there is also within her own medical purview in her case, is there someone who is also providing that trauma-informed responses to make sure that she is, in fact, feeling autonomous within her pregnancy?
Right. And I don't think any of those things are happening, irrespective of my reach in terms of who we know about resources. Everyone's well-intended, but at the end of the day, there just is a real lack of resources. And back to the minor issue, I mean, minors can't go to hotels by themselves. That's illegal. Minors can't, the state of California has really strong restrictions in terms of opening up a shelter for minors. And so there's a lot of hurdles to cross. But without the will of the people to force that on our legislators and state leaders in terms of funding, relaxing those restrictions, or at least funding them more aggressively, I think the problem just is exacerbated. And the traffickers know all this. They know everything that you and I are talking about. Some things we keep, close to the vest, but they know just like we do, and they exploit the system because it's broken. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And SB 357, I think, is just a symptom of the larger issue that we're touching on. Yeah. And I think that it's going to take a journey for all of us to identify that, child marriage up to sexual trauma, labor, exploitation, and trafficking, it does cause harm. And so being able to identify what are those solutions in place, and they may not be reflective of the same intervention across every county, but how do we fund it? How do we support it? What are the initiatives that need to take place? And whose voices need to be at that table?
Those are really good points, Alicia. And I think the good news in all of this is that people are becoming much more aware about human trafficking, sex trafficking, labor trafficking. The White House just issued an executive order recently that mandates that all law enforcement entities throughout the entire federal government must address this issue aggressively, and they have a 2-year plan. As a result of that, we've been approached by multiple agencies that in the past didn't have a mandate or any requirement to address this issue. So we're now training people like the Coast Guard, which is great, because not only do they see, they don't really see as much sex trafficking as they do labor trafficking, where people are brought in from other countries, through our borders and a lot of times on the water. So I mean, I'm excited about that. That the White House is acknowledging this issue and publicizing it. There are conferences that are being held. I'm sure you've attended most of them, just like us. So there is hope for sure.
Oh, absolutely.
So we're going to close up here just briefly now. So is there something you'd like to get the word out about what you do so that our listeners can reach out to you and use your services?
Well, true to being someone who's used to being behind the scenes, I'm never good at self-promotion, but I will share that if anyone is, again, interested in joining the community subcommittee, we do have some upcoming events that are available to the public. One will be invitation only for Truckers Against Trafficking on May 25th. We'll be hosting an internal event dedicated to people who are in the transportation sector addressing human trafficking. So if you are involved in transportation, you're more than welcome to participate. We also will have a training on June 9th. That's a webinar dedicated to collaborating with SOAR California and SOAR National Technical Solution under SAMHSA, addressing social security navigation for individuals working with survivors of trauma and how to more successfully integrate that individual and claim benefits.
So what's your website? How do people get a hold of you?
That is in development. San Diego Regional Advisory Council is going to have its own website. Hopefully we will have it finalized by, I'm going to say the fall, just to be conservative, but I would say maybe even sooner. I'll be glad to share that information with you.
Okay. Yeah, we'll put the word out. How about if they want to get a hold of BRAV Consultations?
BRAV Consultations is pretty. You're gonna. Full disclosure, I'm still a small entity, so I would say the best way to reach out to me would be Alicia Brav at yahoo.com. Just keep it short, sweet, and simple, and we can continue.
What's that email again?
Alicia, ALICIA. B like boy, R raven, A apple, V violin at yahoo.com.
Great. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I'm really very proud of the work that you do, and I know that you're going to make a difference. So thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you, and likewise.
So I just want to let everyone know, I'm excited to announce that Chief Magda Fernanda is going to be on my show on May 4th. Chief Fernanda is the chief of the San Diego Harbor Police Department. She's an amazing woman. It should be a great show.